Deadspace is not a good horror game. I've been watching a lot of videos on Deadspace recently, and most people seem to regard this as one of the scariest games ever made, which I find perplexing. Deadspace has no feeling of isolation, and no subtlety at all, which are imperative to a horror game being scary. The necromorphs in this game can never get enough of the fucking spotlight. They're always in clear vision of you, screaming, and getting as close as possible. The necromorphs have a total of 2 tricks to scare you, which is pretending to be dead and jumping through vents. It's like if you come home from work and your housemate is passed out on the floor, and you think, oh well, he's just drank himself to sleep like usual. But then he jumps up at you and screams a bloogie woogie woo, and you both laugh at the good little prank that he just pulled. But then the next day, he's lying there again, doing the exact same thing, except this time it's in a perfectly lit room. But now he also bursts out of every door in the hallway at the same time, and you think, wow, I should really stop working at the paint tasting factory. These tricks never really scare you. They at most startle you. And then, after it happens, it's back to standard operations. I'm not saying that jump scares can't be effective, because when they're used correctly, they can, but they have to be used sparingly to keep you afraid of that it might happen, but only ever pulling the metaphorical trigger when you have let your guard down. But all the monsters scream at you at max volume, and the music designer slams his face on every key on the keyboard. This happens every single time a monster appears, and it just gets very, very repetitive and becomes a part of the daily routine. Take a look at this section. I'm upgrading my gear on my power bench, and a monster appears during that time. Instead of attacking me or jumping on me, requiring me to act in a panic, it takes a little moment to scream to ensure I know that it's there, and I get a good look at him before instantly blowing him away and returning to business as usual. They never build any tension with this either. There's a part early in the game where you can see the shadow of a necromorph on a wall, which is a nice little bit of tension building. But these moments are so few and far between, they're almost expelled out of your memory. Speaking of shadows, this game is far too bright. There's only a handful of sections where you could be required to use the flashlight on your gun that gives you the impression that something could appear at any moment, but most of the time, you're in a huge, brightly lit room with monsters in plain view. This game does look very pretty, so I guess the designers thought, shit, we can't show off how pretty our game looks if we're constantly in the dark. Turn on the lights. Horror? What's that? Just add another jump scare. That'll scare them enough. The sound design does a good job of at least attempting to build a creepy atmosphere, but it's let down in every other aspect. The game is very transparent when you're safe and when you're not. A perfect example of this is in Chapter 11, when you're loading the marker onto a shuttle. You jump down, monsters appear. You move to a point on the rail, and monsters appear. So on and so forth. This is the most blatant example in my mind for this attitude, but it happens all throughout the game, especially with the many quarantine sections, deflating any tension that it could have produced. Maybe you could build some tension through a sense of isolation, but the game fucks that up too. If it's not having monsters break your eardrums, it's random audio logs or people calling you on fucking Skype every 20 seconds. I'm supposed to be a lone engineer trying to fix this ship and get the hell off it, but the audio chatter doesn't allow this. If they restricted these interactions to the starts and ends of missions, and the audio logs to the hidden loading screens, aka the elevators, it might have added tension. The thing this game fails to understand is that monsters are scarier the less you see of them. But you can see from the very first interaction with a necromorph that this game left that in the bin, along with subtlety, tension, and me taking this game anyway seriously. I'd like to highlight a section in the game that made sure I couldn't even take it remotely seriously. In Chapter 4, in the zero gravity section, this monster did... Oh my fucking god. Now, you might say that this is an action horror game, and to that I say bollocks. It's certainly got the action part of the equation down, but it fails in the horror aspect because the key hallmark of an action horror game is throwing enough enemies at you to put you in a panicked enough state that you must improvise. But this game never does this enough. The absolute peak of this game is in Chapter 5 and Chapter 10, where there's a regenerating monster you can't kill along with a constant barrage of necromorphs. That's when the game's at its most fun. But these chapters are preceded by some of the least fun sections I played in a video game in a while. Chapter 4 has this section where I have to move across an open plane and hide behind boxes in zero gravity, when asteroids will instantly kill you if you step out every 15 seconds. But if playing Call of Duty for 10 minutes wasn't stimulating enough for you, they added a turret section directly after, and fuck it, might as well bring back the turret section in Chapter 8, as well as the whole level, just in case you didn't appreciate it enough the first time. I don't know about everyone else, but the scariest thing for me is blasting a huge alien from the safety of a massive turret. Also, for some ungodly reason, they decided to bring back the waiting behind boxes, but this time, you can move them with kinesis, which, as innovative gameplay mechanics go, is about on par with improving your efficiency on studying by banging your head against a wall to seal in the information. I swear, I couldn't get this fucking section done. I had to tab out and look it up on YouTube. Have I just been drinking too much paint to figure this out? Evidently not, because 127,000 other people watched the playthrough for this section as well. Out of all the videos I've watched about this game, no one has ever brought up this section. Well, I'm going to fucking bring it up, if only to stave off my murder spree for another couple of hours. Look at this! I'm right behind the thing, and that's supposed to be protecting me, yet I still get burnt to a crisp. The thing is, I like the core gameplay loop. Blowing off zombie alien legs with the line gun will never not be entertaining. But it's all this random ancillary bullshit that makes me burn brain cells faster than the pyromaniac anonymous meeting coming across a flamethrower in a child's treehouse. But there has to be something to break up the gameplay sections, or else it will get repetitive. And this is where a horror game would add some puzzles. But as we've established, Dead Space is not a horror game, it's an action game that smothered itself in ketchup. There are puzzles in this game, if you count moving boxes with magic space power as a puzzle, which is just another distraction to keep me away from the juicy meat of Dead Space, which is the combat. There is a second part to the survival horror genre, which is survival in case you haven't forgotten how to count to 2, but I wouldn't know about it, because I elected to play the game on medium difficulty, thinking it would be a nice balance between an effective survival horror experience and not wanting to jab both my eyeballs out of frustration, but apparently not, because I was sitting on a hoard of ammo and medkits just a few chapters in. So if you want to pretend this game is even remotely like a survival horror game, play the game on hard. I can't imagine what this game is like on easy mode. The monsters just must rip off their own limbs for you. The final boss is also a joke. Just strafe around for 3 minutes like you accidentally booted up Ratchet and Clank, and boom, game over. You get awarded with a jump scare. I guess this game starts how it finishes, so you can't fault it for not having looked at the diagram for the story circle. I could go on about how the twist spelt out in the chapter list gets beaten over your head to the point where if you didn't get it, you should send me a DM about where you're buying your paint, or how every character you interact with dies in the most anticlimactic way. But broad points. Is Dead Space scary? Not in the slightest. Is the game fun? Kind of, but it's weighed down by random bullshit that chucks out any good favor the game got for its core gameplay. If you've never played the original Dead Space before, and you're thinking about playing it, I wouldn't. There are better horror games like Amnesia, there are better sci-fi action games like Metroid Prime, hell, there are even better sci-fi horror games like Alien Isolation. And if the core combat is of such astonishing innovation to you, then just play Dead Space 2. The only time I could recommend it is if you have some nostalgia for the game. But then, you'll lose all your nostalgia and end up in a drunken rage like me. I will end what I hesitate to call this a review because it was more like a spanking session for the child who drank the last bit of paint, with a quote from my good friend Marcus, who said, "This game is piss scary when you're 10. True.